Is she safe?
Because of you, she is.
I didn't think. I just saw a little girl.
Most people would have run.
The crack of a rifle shattered a quiet Tuesday afternoon on West Randolph Street. A split-second decision to dive over a terrified 5-year-old girl changed an ordinary nursing student's life forever. She thought she was saving an innocent civilian. She didn't know she was incurring a debt to Chicago's most ruthless crime lord. Clara Joanne Higgins was 24, drowning in tuition debt from Rush University and entirely exhausted. Working the lunch shift at Café Milano in Chicago's bustling West Loop was usually an exercise in patience, balancing trays of artisan paninis and dodging hurried corporate executives. October 14th was supposed to be just another brisk, unremarkable autumn day. The patio was crowded, the espresso machine hummed, and the smell of roasted garlic hung heavy in the crisp air. At the corner table closest to the street sat a little girl who looked entirely out of place. She couldn't have been older than 5, dressed in a pristine, custom-tailored navy wool coat that likely cost more than Clara's car. She was quietly coloring on a napkin, her dark curls framing a cherubic face. What caught Clara's attention wasn't just the child's designer clothes, but the sheer isolation of her. A few tables away sat 2 men in immaculate charcoal suits. They weren't eating. They were scanning the street, their postures rigid, earpieces discreetly tucked into their collars. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Leonardo Fusco, briefly stepped away to answer a vibrating phone, turning his back to the street for just 3 seconds. 3 seconds was all it took. Clara was wiping down an adjacent table when she heard the screech of tires. A black Lincoln Navigator with heavily tinted windows violently hopped the curb, tearing through the decorative iron fencing of the patio. Diners froze. Time seemed to stretch into a horrifying crawl. The rear window of the SUV rolled down, revealing the cold, matte black barrel of a submachine gun. The weapon wasn't aimed at the men in the suits. It was pointed directly at the little girl. Instinct is a terrifying, primal thing. Clara didn't think about her impending midterms, her overdue rent, or her own survival. She saw the girl drop a red crayon, her wide brown eyes staring at the imposing vehicle. Clara lunged. She threw her entire body weight over the child, tackling her to the concrete just as the deafening roar of automatic gunfire erupted. The world dissolved into chaos. Ceramic plates exploded into shrapnel. Wood splintered. The screams of terrified patrons were drowned out by the relentless, mechanical rat-tat-tat of bullets tearing through the cafe's facade. Clara curled herself tightly over the small, trembling body beneath her, squeezing her eyes shut, pressing the girl's face into her apron. Then came the burning. A white-hot, searing pain ripped across the back of Clara's left shoulder, stealing the breath from her lungs. She gasped, tasting dust and copper, as the heavy thud of bullets continued to strike the ground mere inches from her head. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the screech of tires echoed again. The Lincoln sped off down the avenue, leaving nothing but a cloud of exhaust and absolute devastation in its wake. For a moment, there was only the sound of ringing in Clara's ears and the soft, terrified sobs of the child pinned beneath her. Are you okay?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling as she carefully propped herself up on her good arm. Her left arm hung uselessly, warm blood quickly soaking through her white uniform shirt. The little girl looked up, her face smeared with dirt and Clara's blood, but she was miraculously unharmed. "I dropped my crayon," she whimpered, clutching Clara's uninjured arm with surprisingly strong little fingers. "It's okay, sweetie. It's okay," Clara breathed, before a wave of dizziness washed over her. Suddenly, heavy boots hit the pavement. Leonardo, the bodyguard, was there, his face pale and contorted with panic. He didn't ask if Clara was okay. He violently shoved her aside, snatching the little girl into his arms and frantically checking her for wounds. "Mia! Dio mio! Mia! Are you hit?" he shouted, his hands shaking. Mia shook her head, pointing a tiny finger at Clara, who was now slumped against a shattered wooden chair, clutching her bleeding shoulder. "The lady bleeds, Leo." Before Clara could process the sirens wailing in the distance, a convoy of 3 sleek, black Cadillac Escalades swerved onto the street, blocking off the entire block with military precision. This wasn't the police. The doors flew open in unison, and a dozen heavily armed men flooded the street, forming a perimeter around the ruined café. From the center vehicle emerged a man who commanded the immediate, terrifying silence of everyone around him. Dominic Castellano. Clara didn't know his name yet, nor did she know he was the undisputed head of the Castellano Syndicate, an organization that held a quiet, iron grip on the city's underbelly. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke midnight blue suit that screamed wealth, but his face was carved from granite. His dark eyes swept over the carnage, wild and lethal, until they locked onto Leonardo and the little girl. Dominic crossed the patio in 3 massive strides. He dropped to his knees in the broken glass, ignoring the ruin of his expensive trousers, and pulled Mia into his chest. The ruthless crime boss buried his face in his daughter's hair, letting out a ragged breath that sounded entirely too human for a man of his reputation. "Papa," Mia whispered, hugging his neck. "The bad men broke the table. The lady saved me." Dominic froze. Slowly, he pulled back, his eyes tracing the smear of blood on his daughter's coat, blood that didn't belong to her. He turned his head, his piercing gaze locking onto Clara. Clara shrank back against the wall. The pain in her shoulder was blinding, but the intensity in the man's eyes was far worse. It wasn't gratitude she saw in his stare. It was a terrifying, absolute calculation. Leonardo stepped forward, his head bowed in profound shame. "Boss, they caught us blind. The Bianchi family. If it wasn't for the waitress," he swallowed hard, unable to finish the sentence. Dominic stood up slowly, never breaking eye contact with Clara. He walked toward her, his heavy footsteps crunching on the broken porcelain. The paramedics had arrived at the edge of the police barricade, but none of the first responders dared to cross the wall of men in suits. He knelt beside Clara. Up close, she could smell expensive cologne and the faint, metallic scent of gunpowder on his skin. "What is your name?" His voice was a low, rough baritone that vibrated with suppressed violence. "Clara," she gasped, her vision swimming at the edges. "Clara Higgins." Dominic reached out, his large, calloused hand gently brushing the hair away from her sweating forehead. It was an oddly tender gesture from a man who looked ready to burn the city to ashes. "You bled for my blood, Clara Higgins," Dominic said softly, though the words carried the weight of a binding contract. He looked up at one of his lieutenants. "Put her in my car. We are taking her to our private clinic. No police, no public hospitals." "Wait. I can't," Clara weakly protested as 2 large men immediately stepped forward to lift her. "I have a shift. I have nursing school." "You have nothing anymore," Dominic interrupted, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper as he stood over her. "You belong to the Castellano family now, and I protect what is mine." As they lifted her, the edges of Clara's vision went black, the sounds of sirens fading into the heavy, rhythmic thrumming of a world she had just unknowingly entered. The rhythmic, synthetic beep of a cardiac monitor was the first thing Clara registered. It was a familiar sound, one she had studied and monitored countless times during her clinical rotations at Rush University Medical Center, but the air in this room smelled wrong. There was no sharp scent of industrial bleach or institutional floor wax. Instead, she smelled fresh eucalyptus, expensive linen, and the faint, lingering aroma of espresso. Clara forced her eyes open. She wasn't in a hospital ward. She was lying in the center of a cavernous bedroom with vaulted ceilings, mahogany-paneled walls, and heavy velvet curtains drawn tightly against the outside world. The bed itself was massive, outfitted with silk sheets that felt foreign against her skin. To her left, however, a state-of-the-art four-pump fed clear fluids into her right arm, and her left shoulder was heavily bound in thick, immaculate gauze. A sharp ache radiated from her collarbone down to her fingertips, but the edge of the pain was blunted by what she recognized as a heavy dose of Dilaudid. "You should not try to sit up, Miss Higgins." Clara's head snapped toward the corner of the room. A man in his late 50s, wearing a tweed blazer over a surgical scrub top, sat in a leather armchair. He set down a medical chart and approached the bed, offering a polite but strained smile. "I am Dr. Harrison Keller," he said, checking the IV line with practiced efficiency. "You are in a secure medical suite in Lake Forest." The bullet passed clean through the deltoid muscle, missing the axillary artery by less than a centimeter. "You required 42 stitches, but there is no permanent nerve damage." "Lake Forest?" Clara croaked, her throat dry. She tried to push herself up, the room spinning violently. "I need to go home. I have to call my landlord. I have a pharmacology exam on Thursday." "You won't be taking any exams, Clara." The voice came from the doorway, deep and resonant, freezing the blood in Clara's veins. Dominic Castellano stepped into the room. He had discarded the blood-stained suit from the café and was now wearing a dark cashmere sweater and tailored charcoal trousers. He looked less like a frantic father and more like the ruthless syndicate boss the streets of Chicago whispered about. Dr. Keller immediately stepped back, lowering his head in silent deference before quietly exiting the room, closing the heavy oak door behind him. Clara pulled the silk sheets up to her chin, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You can't keep me here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I saved your daughter. You should let me go." Dominic walked slowly to the edge of the bed. His dark eyes were unreadable, calculating. "If I let you walk out of that door, Clara, you will be dead before the sun sets." "That's insane," Clara shot back, wincing as the sudden movement pulled at her stitches. "I'm a nobody. I pour coffee and study textbooks. Nobody wants to hurt me." "You are not a nobody anymore," Dominic corrected softly, leaning against the mahogany bedpost. "The men who attacked the cafe belong to Matteo Bianchi. He runs the West Side ports, and he has been trying to usurp my territory for 6 months. The hit on my daughter was meant to break me. Instead, a waitress interfered. They failed, and in our world, failure requires a scapegoat." He reached into his pocket and tossed a glossy, high-resolution photograph onto the bed. Clara picked it up with a trembling hand. It was a still frame pulled from a security camera across the street from Cafe Milano. It clearly showed Clara diving over Mia, her face perfectly illuminated by the afternoon sun. "Matteo has eyes everywhere," Dominic continued, his tone devoid of emotion, though a muscle feathered in his jaw. "He already knows your name. He knows your address in Wicker Park. He knows you work at Milano. If you go back to your apartment, his men will torture you to find out where I took my daughter, and then they will put a bullet in your head." Clara stared at the photograph, the weight of his words crashing down on her like concrete. Her apartment, her meager life, her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse, gone in the span of 3 seconds. A tear slipped down her cheek, dropping onto the glossy paper. "So I'm your prisoner?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You are under my protection," Dominic replied. He stepped closer, his imposing presence dominating the room. "You bled for my family. In the Castellano syndicate, a debt of blood is absolute. I will tear Chicago apart brick by brick before I let Bianchi's men touch you, but you must stay here, at the estate, until the war is finished." Clara looked up at him, defiance flashing through her fear. "And how long will that take?" "As long as it takes to put Matteo Bianchi in the ground," Dominic stated coldly. He turned toward the door, pausing with his hand on the brass knob. "Mia asked about you. She made you a drawing. I will have the housekeeper bring it up." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, leaving her trapped in a gilded cage built of silk sheets and mafia promises. 3 weeks passed. The sprawling Lake Forest estate, heavily fortified by iron gates, armed guards, and state-of-the-art surveillance, became Clara's entire universe. Her shoulder was healing rapidly, though it left a jagged, angry scar that Dr. Keller assured her would fade with time. She spent her days reading in the private library or walking the manicured gardens, always shadowed by a silent bodyguard, but her most frequent companion was Mia. The little girl had attached herself to Clara with a fierce, quiet devotion. They would sit for hours in the sunroom, Clara using her good arm to help Mia with her watercolor paintings. Through Mia, Clara saw a completely different side of the Castellano operation. The hardened men who patrolled the grounds with assault rifles would soften when the 5-year-old ran past, offering her gentle smiles and sneaking her chocolates from the kitchen. And then there was Dominic. He was a ghost in his own home, spending hours locked in his study, coordinating a brutal underground war that Clara only heard about in hushed whispers among the staff. When they did interact, it was during brief, intense dinners in the formal dining room. The tension between them was palpable. Dominic was guarded, a man conditioned to trust no one, yet he looked at Clara with a heavy, unspoken reverence. Clara, in turn, found herself unnervingly drawn to his quiet strength, despite knowing the violence he was capable of orchestrating. But the quiet routine was a fragile illusion. It happened on a Tuesday, exactly 1 month after the café shooting. Dominic had left the estate at dawn for a supposed peace summit with a neutral family in the city, taking his most loyal men, including Leonardo, with him. The estate was left under the command of Vincent Rossi, a charismatic lieutenant with slicked back hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Clara was in the kitchen, brewing a cup of chamomile tea, when the estate's backup generators hummed to life. The main power had been cut. Instinct, honed by weeks of living in a state of hypervigilance, flared. She abandoned her mug and moved quietly down the service hallway toward the sunroom, where Mia was supposedly watching a movie. As she neared the grand foyer, she heard hushed, urgent voices. Peeking around a marble pillar, she saw Vincent Rossi speaking to 2 men she didn't recognize. They weren't wearing the standard dark suits of the Castellano men. They wore heavy, tactical gear. "The security feeds are looped," Vincent whispered harshly. "You have 10 minutes before the perimeter guards realize the comms are down. Grab the girl and the nurse. Matteo wants them alive, but if the nurse struggles, break her legs." Clara's breath hitched. A mole. The Bianchis hadn't found them by chance. Vincent was handing them over. Panic threatened to paralyze her, but the thought of Mia being dragged away by these men ignited a cold, desperate fury inside her. She slipped back into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the butcher block. She grabbed a heavy 8-inch Wisthoff chef's knife, hiding it against her forearm, hidden by the sleeve of her oversized sweater. She ran up the back staircase, bypassing the foyer, and sprinted toward Mia's playroom on the 2nd floor. She burst through the door. Mia was sitting on the rug, looking up in confusion as the television screen went black. "Clara? Why did the TV turn off?" "Shh, sweetie," Clara said, keeping her voice incredibly calm. She scooped the little girl up with her good arm. "We're going to play a game of hide and seek, but we have to be very, very quiet." She carried Mia toward the master suite, knowing it had a reinforced panic room Dominic had mentioned once in passing. But before she could reach the corridor, a heavy hand grabbed her injured shoulder, violently spinning her around. Clara cried out in pain as she dropped to her knees, instinctively shielding Mia. Vincent Rossi stood over her, a silenced pistol aimed directly at her forehead. "You're a smart girl, Clara," Vincent sneered, signaling for the 2 tactical men to come up the stairs. "But not smart enough. Give me the kid." "Go to hell," Clara spat, clutching Mia tightly. "Boss's orders," Vincent said with a mock pout. "Matteo Bianchi is going to make Dominic watch as he strips his empire away, starting with his precious daughter." Vincent reached down to grab Mia's collar. Clara didn't hesitate. Driving upward with her right hand, she plunged the chef's knife directly into the meat of Vincent's thigh, twisting the blade with everything she had. Vincent roared in agony, his pistol discharging wildly into the ceiling as he collapsed backward, clutching his leg. Blood poured onto the Persian rug. The 2 tactical men raised their weapons, shouting commands. Suddenly, the front doors of the estate exploded inward with a deafening crash. The sound of automatic gunfire tore through the foyer, but this time, Clara knew the sound of her salvation. Dominic hadn't gone to the city. The summit was a trap, and he had figured it out just in time. Leonardo and a dozen of Dominic's men flooded the house. The 2 tactical men on the stairs were cut down before they could even turn around. Dominic stormed up the grand staircase, his face an absolute mask of terrifying, unbridled rage. He held a custom 1911 pistol, his chest heaving as he took in the scene, Vincent bleeding out on the floor, and Clara kneeling defensively over his sobbing daughter, clutching a bloody kitchen knife. Dominic didn't look at Vincent. He immediately dropped to his knees in front of Clara, his large hands gripping her shoulders, checking her frantically for bullet wounds. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a raw, terrifying vulnerability. "Clara, look at me. Are you hit?" "No," Clara gasped, dropping the knife, her hands trembling violently as the adrenaline began to crash. "I'm okay. Mia is okay." Dominic pulled them both against his chest, burying his face in Clara's neck. For a long moment, the ruthless Mafia Boss just held the woman who had, for the second time, saved the only thing he loved in the world. When he finally pulled back, his eyes shifted to Vincent, who was whimpering on the floor, pressing his hands against his severed femoral artery. The vulnerability in Dominic's eyes vanished, replaced by the chilling, dead stare of the Castellano Don. He stood up, leveling his pistol at his former lieutenant. "You broke the oath, Vincent," Dominic said softly, the quiet tone far more terrifying than a shout. Vincent looked up, his face pale with blood loss and sheer terror. "Dominic, please, Matteo," he threatened. The single gunshot echoed through the hall, silencing Vincent forever. Dominic lowered the weapon and turned back to Clara. The barrier between them was permanently shattered. She wasn't just a civilian he owed a debt to anymore. She had fought for his family. She had drawn blood for him. "The war ends tonight," Dominic said, his gaze locking with Clara's, a silent promise passing between them. "And tomorrow, we figure out where you belong." The storm rolled off Lake Michigan just after midnight, unleashing a torrential downpour that violently washed the blood from the marble steps of the estate. Clara sat on the edge of the velvet sofa in the reinforced panic room, the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the steel-shuttered windows, the only sound piercing the heavy silence. Mia was fast asleep, her small head resting in Clara's lap, her tiny fists securely clutching the hem of Clara's oversized sweater. Dominic had left 3 hours ago. After securing the house and ordering a full lockdown, he had gathered his most lethal men. He wore a heavy Kevlar vest over his dark dress shirt, his eyes devoid of any warmth or humanity. He hadn't said goodbye. He only told Clara, "When I return, there will be nothing left of Matteo Bianchi to fear." The wait was agonizing. Clara stared at the heavy vault door, her mind racing. She was a nursing student. She was supposed to be studying the nervous system, worrying about student loans and utility bills, not sitting in an underground bunker while a mafia kingpin waged war on the streets of Chicago because she had saved his daughter. Yet, as she gently stroked Mia's dark curls, Clara realized a terrifying truth. She wasn't longing for her cramped apartment anymore. The mundane world she had been ripped from felt distant, pale, and entirely devoid of the fierce, intoxicating loyalty she had found within these walls. At 4 a.m., the heavy metallic thud of the vault's deadbolts retracting made Clara jolt upright. The thick steel door swung open, revealing Leonardo. His bespoke suit was ruined, torn, and stained, but he offered Clara a tired, deeply respectful nod. "It's safe, Miss Higgins. The boss is waiting for you in the study." Clara carefully transferred the sleeping Mia to the plush daybed, pulling a woven cashmere blanket over her shoulders before following Leonardo out of the bunker. The estate was quiet now. The bodies were gone. The broken glass swept away, though the faint, clinical smell of bleach lingered in the grand foyer. She found Dominic standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, watching the rain batter the glass. He had discarded the Kevlar and his ruined shirt, standing bare-chested in the dim, golden light of a single desk lamp. He was covered in dark bruises, a fresh, shallow cut running along his strong jawline, but his posture was relaxed for the first time since Clara had met him. "Is it over?" Clara asked softly, her voice barely more than a whisper in the cavernous room. Dominic turned to face her. The lethal, icy exterior had melted away, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. "Matteo Bianchi is dead," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. His lieutenants have surrendered their territories. The port is ours. There will be no retaliation. The war is finished. Clara let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for a month. So, we're safe. Mia is safe, Dominic corrected, walking slowly toward his heavy mahogany desk. He picked up a thick manila envelope and held it out to her. And so are you. Clara frowned, stepping forward but refusing to take the envelope. What is that? Your freedom, Dominic said, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her heart race. Inside is a new passport, a deed to a house in Carmel by the Sea in California, and access to an offshore account with enough money to ensure you never have to work another shift or worry about tuition again. Leonardo will drive you to the private airstrip in an hour. By sunrise, you will be out of this life forever. Clara stared at the brown paper, a cold, painful knot forming in her stomach. You're sending me away. I am keeping my promise, Dominic replied, his voice tightening. He dropped the envelope onto the desk and stepped closer to her, the space between them vanishing. You saved my daughter. You defended my home. You bled for my family. I owe you your life back, Clara. A safe life. A normal life. One without bulletproof glass and dead men in the hallway. And what if I don't want a normal life anymore? Clara challenged, her chin tilting up defensively. Dominic froze. Clara, you don't know what you're saying. This world, it taints everything it touches. It will ruin you. It already changed me, she fired back, stepping boldly into his space until her chest almost brushed against his. I put a knife into a man tonight, Dominic. I didn't hesitate. I didn't panic. I did it because he threatened Mia. Because he threatened your family. She reached up, her trembling fingers gently tracing the line of his bruised jaw. You told me the day we met that I belonged to the Castellano family now. Were you lying? Dominic's breath hitched. He looked down at her, the impenetrable walls he had spent a lifetime building finally crumbling into dust. He saw the fierce, unyielding fire in her eyes, the eyes of a woman who had walked into hell and decided to claim the throne. If you stay, Dominic whispered fiercely, his large hands coming up to firmly cup her face, there is no walking away. You will be mine, in every way, forever. Then make me yours, Clara breathed. Dominic didn't need another invitation. He crashed his lips down onto hers, the kiss desperate, consuming, and fueled by weeks of terrifying tension. Clara wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, anchoring herself to the most dangerous man in the city. She knew the risks. She knew the blood that stained his hands and the enemies that still lurked in the shadows. But as he pulled her flesh against his chest, sweeping her off her feet, Clara knew she had found exactly where she was meant to be. She had entered the Castellano estate as a terrified captive, a collateral casualty of a mafia war. She would remain as its undisputed queen. Clara's ordinary life ended the moment she dove into the crossfire. But her new reign as the matriarch of the Castellano family is just beginning. What did you think of Clara and Dominic's intense journey? If you loved this thrilling mafia romance, be sure to smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding stories. See you in the next one.